impact on our people and the world. Our doors are always open for business in a safe, secure, peaceful, and thriving environment. This peace and tranquility allows our people to express themselves freely, fostering a society of diverse ideas and opinions. Our people are ready and waiting to host you with beaming smiles and enchanting song and dance. Driven by our rich history and cultural heritage, we are proud to share our stories with the world. Every narrative, every challenge, every effort, whether good or bad, shapes our collective identity. The beautiful, colorful, and alluring landscapes of Botswana welcome you. In this stable and majestic atmosphere, we safeguard our natural resources, preserving some of the world's most unique physical features. The sheer harmony between our people and nature is a testament to the sustainability and balance we strive to maintain for future generations. Come and meet the right business partners and investors to diversify and expand. Set up your investment in Botswana and leverage on Botswana's proximity to the wider Southern African market. Our interconnected road, rail networks, coupled with bespoke infrastructural developments, make it easy for you to open shop, network, and trade in Botswana. These serve our economy and benefit our citizens positively, fueling economic growth and social progress. It is through reliable, stable governance and steadfast vision that we transform all our aspirations into tangible achievements. In a quest to make our country conducive for meetings, conferencing, and multi-sectoral tourism hub, we are more than ready to welcome the world to our shores. We invite you to be part of this remarkable African story, to witness the realization of the promises made and dreams fulfilled. Together, let us forge ahead, shaping a brighter future that is grounded in peace and harmony. This is Botswana, our pride, your destination. Dumelang and welcome to Botswana Kabula. Botswana, the essence of stability. We invite you to explore the spirit of strength and witness its profound impact on our people and the world. Our doors are always open for business in a safe, secure, peaceful, and thriving environment. This peace and tranquility allows our people to express themselves freely, fostering a society of diverse ideas and opinions. Our people are ready and waiting to host you with beaming smiles and enchanting song and dance. Driven by our rich history and cultural heritage, we are proud to share our stories with the world. Every narrative, every challenge, every effort, whether good or bad, shapes our collective identity. The beautiful, colorful, and alluring landscapes of Botswana welcome you. In this stable and majestic atmosphere, we safeguard our natural resources, preserving some of the world's most unique physical features. The sheer harmony between our people and nature is a testament to the sustainability and balance we strive to maintain for future generations. Come and meet the right business partners and investors to diversify and expand. Set up your investment in Botswana and leverage on Botswana's proximity to the wider Southern African market. Our interconnected road, rail networks, coupled with bespoke infrastructural developments, make it easy for you to open shop, network, and trade in Botswana. These serve our economy and benefit our citizens positively, fueling economic growth and social progress. It is through reliable, stable governance and steadfast vision that we transform all our aspirations into tangible achievements. In a quest to make our country conducive for meetings, conferencing, and multi-sectoral tourism hub, we are more than ready to welcome the world to our shores. We invite you to be part of this remarkable African story, to witness the realization of the promises made and dreams fulfilled. Together, let us forge ahead, shaping a brighter future that is grounded in peace and harmony. This is Botswana, our pride, your destination. Dumelang and welcome to Botswana Kabula. Botswana, the
You is a very good end to the first day in terms of the discussions we've had. So, good afternoon, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, welcome to the last session for today. I think if you recap on today, a lot that was discussed was around diversifying the economy away from mineral revenues, and diversification has been the key word for today. And therefore, the panel discussion today that we're having around the International Financial Services Center, and really how can we foster, the financial sector in innovative and green financial services. Just a bit of a recap in terms of the financial services sector that we have set up in Botswana. This was established in 2003, and on the back of what I've already discussed around the need to diversify our economy. I mean, when you think about why this IFSC was established in Botswana, it's really based on some of the kind of the words that have come out in the beautiful characteristics of Botswana today, which are the central location to Southern Africa, same time zone as continental Europe, political stability, strong credit rating, strong macroeconomic status, and being one of the least corrupt countries in Africa. Botswana's IFSC framework has evolved over time, which has resulted in numerous IFCs setting up their headquarters here in Botswana. For Botswana to achieve its ambition of becoming a world-class financial service hub, there is some work that needs to be done that we are aware, and that's some of the discussions we'll be tackling in today's panel discussion. But I think the good news is that the journey has started. But when we look at the financial service sector, we need to acknowledge that this is evolving. There is a need to be innovative, and if you look at green financial services, that is core in terms of globally meeting the targets that we have set for ourselves. And if you look at the last panel discussion that we spoke to, Botswana has a commitment to reduce greenhouse gases by 15%. And therefore, we as the financial sector play an integral role in achieving those targets. I guess this brings us to the question at hand and what we'll be trying to solve in today's panel discussion. How does Botswana benefit from our first mover advantage of already having set an IFSC in 2003 to capture innovative and green financial services? Our esteemed panelists, whose experience spans over years and sectors, will assist us in unpacking this question with all the vast knowledge that they have in the financial sector. In unpacking this question, it's only fair that we start off with a health check of the IFSC in Botswana. What are the challenges are being faced? And then how do we foster innovation and green financial services in Botswana? I will start off with briefly introducing my panelists, and I will mention a very cliche line, which is true, because if you look at the bios of some of our panelists, I don't think we have enough time to go through all of the achievements and accolades that they have received during their tenure, but I think I'll just briefly introduce them as they come up to the stage. I'll start off with Mr. Uduetse Mutsidisi. Mr. Mutsidisi is the Chief Executive Officer of Non-Bank Financial Institutions Regulatory Authority, which we call NBFIRA, leading the implementation of the mandate to contribute to the stability of the financial system. He has an illustrious career in the financial sector, as well as leadership abilities and track record of achieving organizational goals. He previously held the position of Deputy Governor at Bank of Botswana, where he oversaw strategic central banking matters, management of foreign exchange reserves, as well as a policy advice to the government on key economic and financial issues. He has served on various boards, one being the chairperson of Absa Bank Botswana, Obviously, me being in AbSA Bank Botswana, we have worked before, as well as a vice chairperson of Botswana Stock Exchange. Currently, he is chair of the Continental Central Banking Annual Conference on Reserves Management. Please welcome on stage Mr. Mutsidisi. Next, we have Mr. Thapelo Tsaule. Mr. Tsaule is a seasoned financial markets expert with a cumulative experience of over 22 years, having worked for the Central Bank of Botswana and Botswana Stock Exchange. He was appointed CEO of Botswana Stock Exchange in January 2016, having been Deputy CEO since February 2014. Mr. Tsaule is the President of African Securities Exchange Association, ASEA, and the Chairman of the Committee of SADC Stock Exchanges. Welcome, Mr. Tsaule. Next, we have Mr. Jim Hodges. Jim joined European Investment Bank in 2008 and now holds the role of Regional Director of EIB, responsible for Botswana, Kenya, Malawi, and Zimbabwe. In his role, he has appraised, structured, and negotiated financing for investment projects and responsible for lending to sovereign and financial intermediary financing. Welcome, Jim. Next, we have Elizabeth Howard. Elizabeth is the founder of Lilapa, an advisory firm specialized in African capital markets development. She established the African Crowdfunding Association, AfCFTA, to drive the regulatory agenda. She advises several regulatory authorities on the design and implementation of regulations for investment-based crowdfunding. Welcome, Elizabeth. And finally, we have Mukhtar Ba. Mukhtar is a co-founder and president of Brussels Africa Hub, an international non-profit organization led by banking and financing professionals from the African diaspora. He is also a member of the management committee of the Belgian Finance Center, an organization that aims to position Brussels as an international financial center. Welcome, Mr. Ba. My name is Salma Badwal. I am the treasurer of AbSA Bank Botswana, and I am privileged to be the moderator of this session. I think when you look at the financial sector, we as banks play an integral role in terms of the development, and therefore matters about innovation and green financial services are core to what we do. So I think we can now start our panel discussion. So I'll start off with you, Mr. Mutsidisi. And I think it's really just to give the audience somewhat of a health check of the IFSC environment in terms of how has it evolved since it was established, and some of the key observations that you've had around the development of the IFSC in Botswana. The mic's over. Yes.
Yes, I think we can hear each other now. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for that, Salma, for the introductions. I think the best place, and I'll come directly to your question about the health of our IFSC shortly, but let me try to sketch the context of the evolution of the IFSC in the following way. If you look at you recall the presentation that was made by the CEO of BITC this morning, we are aligned in terms of some of the imperatives that led to the consideration of establishment of an IFSC, a Center for Financial Services. Without repeating many of them, I think it's a truism that Botswana has a great reputation in terms of macroeconomic management. We have a very strong, solid growth performance, and the Achilles heel has always been that this economic performance has been dominated by very few sectors, in particular the mining sector, as we heard this morning. And therefore, the idea of establishing a financial center was born out of the need to diversify the economy to one of the important sectors in the economy of Botswana. So that is why, as she rightly says, in 2003, Botswana decided to formally promulgate the law and establish the International Financial Services Center. I think generally, if we were to give a one-line summary of where we are with regard to the IFSC, is that the performance of the IFSC has not really met our expectations. I think that would be a fair assessment in terms of both the number of entities that have signed up in the IFSC, as well as the value of business that has been traded within the IFSC. And there are a number of reasons for that. That is not a reason for despair. If anything, I think it's a motivation for us to strive further, and I'll outline some of the things that I believe are now more congruent or conducive to a flourishing IFSC than it was maybe the case in 2003. One, I think it's fair that Botswana has moved a lot in terms of important attributes that facilitate a successful establishment of an IFSC. One of those is the IT infrastructure. I think there's a common agreement that as far as IT infrastructure is concerned, Botswana has invested very well, and we have begun to reap the benefits of this investment in terms of connectivity and access by the general populace. So I'll take that as one of the more positive and facilitative factors that Botswana can now hang on in terms of promoting an FSC. The second one is skills. Back in 2003, while a lot of citizens were being trained and have been trained all the way through tertiary levels, there was still recognition that the requisite skills, particularly in this sometimes complex area of international finance, were not yet in abundance. That situation, I think, has changed and is changing for the positive, which further facilitates, I think, our potential and ability to be able to retrace and make sure that we can invigorate the idea of the FSC. The second point or third point that I think is stronger than it was, I think, is what came out this morning, that we are part of the Continental Free Trade Area. And therefore, we stand at the apex, right at the center of that crossroads, where we can benefit and leverage from providing services in bulk for the region, particularly of a financial type. Secondly, integration of regional and intercontinental payment and settlement system is a positive, I think, which African continent is aspiring for in order to facilitate trade, generally speaking. One may ask, why all this unrelenting push? Why is this enduring idea of trying to have the IFSC as one of the major contributors or sectors in the economy? If you look worldwide and see what IFSC financial centers have done to countries, and I'll give you a taste of statistics shortly, you would appreciate why a successful financial sector could be so important in many respects to a country. Let me give you an example. For instance, New York contributes to GDP of the United States about 10%, and in terms of the job share market in terms of the share of the job market, 5.4%. Similar figures for the city in London at 9% versus 5.2%. If you look at even smaller economies like ourselves, for example, the Channel Islands, the International Financial Services Center contributes approximately 60% to GDP. Now, if you put scale, you begin to appreciate that a successful functioning center what it can do for Botswana and what it can contribute. And conversely, about 30% of the job market is comes from the IFSC. Same thing for Luxembourg. We have, I believe, some people or somebody from Luxembourg in this audience or this morning, kind of similar order of magnitude of them. So that says to you that it's important to persist and pursue this. And some of the developments and the attributes that I've highlighted, I think are putting us in a much stronger position to pursue this, particularly in the context of the green finance, and we'll come to some of those and some of the incentives that we believe are necessary in order to foster a development of a viable IFSC. So that to me is the context and the in which this idea of an FSC must be conceived. I will end up, moderator, very briefly to give chance to other panelists. If you consider, you would classify the financial services sector in Botswana broadly around banking and non-banking. The numbers and performance over the last 10 years has been very impressive. Let me give you, for example, on the asset size of the sector that I look after, the banking financial institutions, in 2013, the value of the assets, the entities there, was roughly 89 billion. As of 2022 year end, we're talking close to 170 billion. So that gives you an order of magnitude of roughly 8% annual growth. That is decent. That shows you that the financial sector broadly in Botswana has been quite vibrant and steadily contributing to our GDP. The banking assets, similar situation, 60.4 billion in 2013. At the end of 2022, we're talking about 117 billion. That's the total asset. Order of magnitude, again, they're about 9% annual growth, which I think, in line with the aspirations for 2036, high-income country, is pretty much bang on the margin in terms of what the kind of growth we should be having from those sectors. In terms of the entities, I will highlight what has happened on the non-banking sector. We were at roughly 600 entities in 2013. As of year end in 2022, we were just shy of 850 entities listed. This is across retirement fund, what we call capital markets. This is non-bank lending, as well as insurance. And lately, of course, as you know, we have the virtual assets sector to look after. So, moderator, let me pause there by giving that historical account, and we can get into some of the discussions about how do you invigorate, how do we then give the push to ensure that the IFSC really takes the place that it rightly deserves in the economy of Botswana in order to support broad economic growth, job creation, and financial intermediation, which is so important. We can get to the statistics in terms of the banked and unbanked, access to finance and those kind of things. And this is where the financial sector becomes so important. In some of the sections that we attended this afternoon, finance has been cited as one of the constraints to very good ideas that young people, not just young people, people generally have conceived in terms of the context of growing our economy. So that is how I will position the introductory remarks on this. Thank you very much. I'm taking too much time.
Thank you, Mr. Mutsidisi, and I think you touched on very important points. Firstly, if you look at the growth of the financial sector, there's definitely a good story to tell there, but also you spoke to some of the challenges that we need to talk to. I think you also spoke to the importance of human capital, which is something we'll also speak to. But I think before we get onto that, I just want to hear from you, Mr. Taule. You just completed a very successful roadshow in London. And I just want to hear from a capital markets perspective, what is the investment climate of Botswana, how are people characterizing Botswana, and how attractive is it for investors to come and bring funding within Botswana. So just a quick view of you from what happened, the success story of the roadshow recently completed. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Thanks, moderator. Yeah, I think we just completed last week a very successful investor roadshow in London as Botswana Stock Exchange. And I must highlight that, when you look at our market, especially the stock market, we have about 30 to 40% of our participants from outside the country participating in our market, because it's very important from a strategic point of view that when you develop a market, you have a good mixture of locals and foreigners in the market. That is really what creates a market. And a majority of our investors from outside are from it's UK first, and then the US market. And quite importantly, as it has been emphasized here, investor perception in Botswana, on Botswana is extremely good now because of a lot of competitive and comparative advantage to other countries. Number one, we are one of the few countries in Africa that doesn't have captive capital. When you bring your money in Botswana, you can take your money in Botswana. What happens in other markets is that you bring money in, but to take it out, several things happen. Either you can't take it out because the country doesn't have enough foreign reserves to back your dollars that you want to take out. That doesn't happen in Botswana. We've got strong balance sheet, external foreign reserves to back your investments, should you want to take them out. And also, in other countries, if you also want to take them out, sometimes you need to queue on the line. You need to fill an application form and say, I need to take so much dollars outside this country. And then it will take up to 3 months, 6 months. And I think that doesn't happen in Botswana. I think that's some of the advantages that we have. And also, I think relatively, we trade in a currency that is, of course, although depreciating, but it's depreciating in a very nice manner. It's stable. Unlike other currencies, they go zigzag. The moment you try to divest, probably it have gone down 20 times down, and you don't even know how much you are going to get. That's not what the puller says. But we are seeing a lot of investors who are willing to come into our market, either as people coming to raise capital in the market, number one, as people coming into our market to invest to get returns. I mean, year to date, the stock market total return is about 18.2%. And 18.2% from January up to now, I think it's a good return on a stable currency. Other markets have got 100% returns, but the currency it's close to minus something. So it doesn't add a lot of value. We are seeing a lot of, at the stock exchange at least, we are seeing a lot of increased interest also from companies regionally coming to our market to raise capital. I think in the coming few weeks we'll be listing some of the regional companies who have seen Botswana as an investment destination to raise capital, which I think is it's quite a very good thing. And then when they raise capital here, it doesn't necessarily imply that all the money is going to be coming from Botswana. You have other people from other countries buying those companies in Botswana. So I think it will work quite well for us. But I think to just re-emphasize based on last week's view from the UK is that I think there are positive sentiment in investors bringing money in Botswana. There are positive sentiments in companies raising capital in our market, and there are also positive sentiments in people setting up in Botswana, at least from the capital markets perspective. So I think it's quite a good thing for us.
Okay, thank you. And I think you touched on some very good points around easy flow of capital, strong currency, and it's good to hear that that's the kind of sentiments that are out there. And I think just touching on some of the points, and I think talking about a good investment climate in Botswana, and Mr. Mutsidisi spoke about the benefits of setting up an IFSC. I'm going to bring you in, Mr. Mukhtar, around some of these countries that have managed to transform themselves into a well-established IFSC. So if you have any examples in terms of, which countries have transformed themselves to develop the IFSC to world-class, and then also what are the challenges that you tend to see that you could highlight and could be key learnings for us in terms of our IFCFC development?
Thank you very much, Salma, for this great question. Like you said in the introduction, I myself am a member of the management committee of the Belgium Finance Center, which is, we are an IFC currently in the Belgian market. If I roughly look at the figure, you have around 500 billion euro of asset under management currently being managed in Belgium. But to your question is, again, what are the key drivers for a successful IFC? That's a fundamental question. And when I look at in Europe, where, let's say, the market that I know the best, I look at countries like Luxembourg. And Luxembourg is actually a country which is boxed between the two giants. On the one hand, you have France. On the other hand, you have Germany. So, and then the question is, how can a small country like Luxembourg, that is around 600,000 inhabitants, and over, let's say, every working day from 8 a.m. to, let's say, 7 p.m. in the evening, they double or they triple in population. So the question is, how comes that a small country has succeeded? And knowingly, 100 kilometers further, you have Frankfurt, that giant international financial center. And if you take the TGV, you go, let's say, 2 hours further, you are in Paris Europlace, which is currently competing with London very hard. And a bit further, even you can go to Amsterdam. And so, again, so countries like Botswana, I see the similarities with countries like Luxembourg. Definitely there is a lot to be kind of studied around and have a discussion, but the key fundamental, again, what we understood through our own analysis and our own study at the level of my organization, which is the Brussels Africa Hub, which has as a sole mission how to facilitate the flow of capital between Europe and Africa and vice versa. We understood that the fundamental key driver is definitely talent. And unfortunately for the African continent, you cannot mine yourself away toward talent. Talent is something that needs to be nurtured. And therefore, that's for me, the policy makers and if the private sector, they have to sit around the table and say, okay, how can we nurture world-class talent? Because again, at the end of the day, is as an institutional investor, I would like to know whether there are investable, again, the word investable here is fundamental, it's investable companies, projects in the market where I want to go. I'll give you one example, and I stop there. In 2017, a major headline, let's say the Wall Street Journal, they issued a headline. That one was really detrimental for the African continent because the top two American private equities, so KKR and Blackstone, both of them came to the African continent in the early 2010s. And then in 2017, KKR said to the world, I came to Africa, I couldn't find investable projects. So the word was, the headline was, Africa is not investable. So that is something that absolutely was detrimental to Africa because many institutional investors that wanted back then to look toward Africa just said, we stop here. So now the question is, how can we reignite that, let's say, optimism that started in the 2010 when McKinsey published this, let's say, also a very good headline, The Lions and the Move. So I stop there for now.
Thank you, and I think, round of applause. I think you touch on the similar point that Mr. Mutsidisi spoke to around human capital. And I think I'm going to bring you in, Jim Hodges, around, human capital, looking at your regional and probably globally looking at the fact that you are part of EIB. We know human capital is very important, particularly if you want to create a hub for innovation and green financial services. So kind of what are the best practices in place that you see around talent retention or talent attraction that Botswana could learn from as we try to create this hub for innovative and financial and green financial services?
Thank you very much. Just a quick word before I speak. I think that the other panelists have already taken a lot of the thunder out of what I was going to say, so it means it's a short response. But I work for the European Investment Bank, just to give you some perspective of where I'm coming from. We're owned by the EU member states. We're the biggest multilateral in the world, and we lend about 10 to 11 billion euros outside EU every year. And we work very heavily, of course, with the financial sector, but also with the public sector too. And this issue around resources is an issue that a lot of countries are facing, a lot in this region are facing, a lot on the African continent are facing. There's a lot of centers vying to become financial centers, and financial centers are simply just a concentration of financial services with a pool to a large capital base. And Botswana is well placed potentially to do that. But human capital is one of the big things in there. I think a lot of the things that make Botswana an attractive destination are some of the things which everyone's touched on. That's security, framework, reputation. So there's a lot that's going for Botswana. The way we've seen this, so, and just for your information, the nearest financial centers to us are Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Mauritius. Nairobi, slightly further away, servicing East Africa, and then in the north, of course, you have Morocco, which is the biggest financial sector on the continent. South Africa has gone through a lot of problems. A lot of that is downgrading in terms of creditworthiness and grey listing, and that's you can see both Johannesburg and Cape Town falling quite drastically in the ranking of financial centers. That gives Botswana an opportunity because you do want to be investing physically in the region. That's very important. The other financial sector is Mauritius, which is going the other way. That's risen about 13 points in the last 13 years. And Mauritius focused on two real aspects, one of them being human capital. So they took some very bold decisions as a country to move forward. Very small population, relatively speaking. And the government spent a lot of time focusing on educating their population to work precisely in financial services. And so what you do is you have a collection of very skilled people there working in the services. They also open themselves internationally to, particularly to Europe and to the Americas, to bring talent and to bring training and bring education to the island, and that's helped tremendously. And then the government has been very bold in taking some very strong decisions, particularly in the fiscal, how they organize it. They've got a very mature tax regime now that's incredibly attractive to investors. And they've also gone out of their way to formulate partnerships, tax partnerships with other countries, notably India more recently. And these are the elements that you need to make a financial center, but resources is key to that. You mentioned Luxembourg, where I happened to live for 8 years in the financial sector, funny enough. So I know exactly what you mean. And Luxembourg did exactly the same thing. They spent a tremendous amount of money on talent acquisition, but they also highlighted one of the challenges with creating a financial sector, and that's opening up. There's very few financial centers that have been created in a closed environment. Singapore is obviously the most publicized one. Luxembourg is the same, so 50% of the population are foreigners, most of them working in the financial sector. Singapore was the same. Singapore opened up their markets in terms of training purely to international. They aligned themselves with international standards, as did Mauritius, as did Luxembourg. And they set themselves as a destination for financing, for capital to come to flow to. And that's really only possible with a very strong and very brave political decision at the end of the day, because intuitively it seems bad to bring lots more people in. And there are some dangers to it. So gentrification, of course, is one. Rising prices is another. So there are dangers to bringing capital in, to bringing talent in. But ultimately, these centers have shown that it's to their ultimate benefit at the end of the day. But it's a very hard political decision to make, and it might go contrary to other decisions that the country is trying to make. But it's so far, in our experience, it's what's achieved it. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think you raised a good point around, opening it up, bringing in the talent to potentially develop talent in country. And I think it was mentioned earlier that the BITC also assists in bringing in the right level of talent should we identify that need in the financial sector. Mr. Mutsidisi, I don't know if you want to add a local lens in terms of kind of the efforts that we put in around retaining talent in country around the financial sector?
Yes, indeed. I think that it's often overemphasized that there's lack of talent in Botswana to be able to support some of these services that come with the likes of IFSCs. I think it was Kels who this morning used an expression, you tweak it and make it work. So we have pools, I think, of talent in this country, which I think with the proper adjustment should be able to do that. Our labor market is one of the most flexible ones, certainly in our region, in terms of exit and entry and contract negotiation, renewals and termination, etc., etc. Over the long haul, Botswana has not shied away from saying we will import talent where there is a demonstrated need. I mean, many people can speak for other sectors across the economy where that has been the case, where that was done in order to facilitate growth in the respective. So I'm not convinced that it is such a major constraint in terms of establishment of a thriving IFSC in Botswana. It is important, no doubt about that, but I think there are other things that we can maybe get into shortly, which are also necessary in order to provide an optimal environment for a thriving IFSC. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think it's quite comforting to hear that we do not put any sort of restrictions around bringing in talent and are nurturing the talent that we already have. So I'm just going to switch the gear up to talk about innovation and green financial services. And when I think innovation, crowdfunding is one of the first things that comes to mind. And I think if we reflect on some of the questions that came out in today's discussion, was about accessibility to funding. And therefore, as we try to develop the financial sector, crowdfunding becomes something that, we definitely need to harness in this country. So a question to you, Ms. Howard, around crowdfunding. What would you describe to be attractive characteristics that an IFSC should possess to attract such investments? And also, what are the key learnings you're seeing in other markets that we could adopt to attract crowdfunding into Botswana?
Thank you so much, Dumelang. Been waiting to say that for a while. Very happy to be here. My name is, underneath my name you see African Crowdfunding Association, but the name of my advisory company is Lelapa, just from pure inspiration from the beautiful Setswana language. In many ways I feel like I'm back home. So it's such a great question, and I just want to sense check with the audience. Could you raise your hand if you're an entrepreneur? Great. Can you raise your hand if you've heard of crowdfunding before? Okay, great. So in the context of this discussion, we're going to not be talking about donations-based crowdfunding, like Kickstarter and GoFundMe. We're going to be talking about investments crowdfunding. And when you move from donations to investments, you're talking about a startup or an SME that's going to go to the general public as a private company and raise capital. in exchange for shares or a debt agreement or another investment instrument. And that means we move into a regulated space. So the first ingredient for an IFSC that wants to support its SMEs through crowdfunding is to have an enabling regulatory framework. Many people ask me why there isn't crowdfunding activity in Africa. And it is because we do not have enabling regulatory frameworks. Kenya, Mauritius, Angola, Morocco, Tunisia, there are a handful of countries that have started the journey of drafting and in some cases finalizing a crowdfunding, investment crowdfunding regulation. I don't know a single licensee. So I don't know a single crowdfunding platform that has a license in any of those markets, which means that the regulation is there, but it's not enabling. So the second thing is really to make sure that when you do draft a regulatory framework, people actually adopt it. And the way to get people to, so I'm talking about market participants, to adopt your regulation is to make sure that they've been taken into account deeply from the start in the design of those regulations. And very often in the context, regulatory context that I've been privy to, there are often serious trust issues between regulators and private sector that prevent an honest conversation, a constructive conversation between intermediaries and a regulator. The approach that I bring to design regulations through Lelapa is what I call a systems change design process. That means that you start by deeply understanding the system that you're trying to change, and in this case, SME access to finance. And then you work backwards, and you look at all of the people, from the stock exchange to the EIB, to the other DFIs, to the microfinance guys. Anyone who's trying to put money into an SME, you deeply understand their business model and why exactly they cannot get small businesses funded. And when you start from that perspective, your private sector stakeholder engagement process is very different. You bring them in a much more comprehensive way, and you land up with a regulatory framework that really meets their needs, that it reflects an understanding of their actual business models. So this year I was able to work with Ghana Securities and Exchange Commission on investments crowdfunding regulations. And I brought in all the local fund managers. And I asked one of them, what is the single biggest reason that we don't have more SME investment in Ghana? And they said, the cost of investment readiness. This means, and I think EIB colleagues will know this well, the majority of our SMEs in sub-Saharan African markets require very small deal sizes of risk capital. So $100,000 or less, $200,000, $500,000. But they also require 6 months, generally, of investment readiness, of getting ready to receive that money. And who's going to pay for that? Not that SME, believe me. And is the fund manager going to pay for it? Maybe. And that's why the business model of those intermediaries in SME finance breaks down. And it is not because you arrive with a crowdfunding platform that you're going to solve those problems. The crowdfunding platform has to be an infrastructure that reduces the cost of doing those small size investments for the people and the organizations that are trying to do them anyway. Your angel investment syndicates, your accelerators, your incubators, the ones of them that are really good and they've got investment arms, and your local fund managers. That is who crowdfunding, that is the group of people that crowdfunding has to work for. So the notion that investments crowdfunding platforms are some disruptive fintech force is a joke. They have to be fully integrated into our SME finance ecosystem. Through crowdfunding at the very early stages of capital markets development, we need to be getting SMEs funded as a first step onto the ladder of capital markets, so that later they land up on the Botswana Stock Exchange. And so crowdfunding should be viewed in that light. And that means that the regulation in Botswana probably, and certainly in Ghana and Kenya, is going to look very different to what you see in the UK and the EU and the US. So we must be very careful not to copy-paste what we see in the UK And I think perhaps in other parts of capital markets regulation, that has been an issue. So you land up with a regulation that focuses on those intermediaries, right? The angel investors, the fund managers, the incubators and the accelerators. And they need to be facilitated and enabled by this regulation not to provide equity or just debt, which is normally split into the NBFIRA doing equity and the central bank doing debt. That's how it is a lot in overseas markets. Because the SMEs need something in between. They need revenue sharing agreements, they need profit sharing agreements, they need this jargony term called mezzanine finance, they need royalty agreements, they need lease agreements, they need invoice financing, they need factoring. They need all the things that make sense for these SMEs where they are. And if you're able to allow these intermediaries to provide that type of financing, then they will work hard to find where is there a very good fit between retail investors in Botswana and these SMEs. Where is that nice, comfortable matching of supply and demand for those SMEs? And that is a very long process. So it's a long commitment. And it's something that we hope in Ghana will, now that we have a regulation that we believe is fit for purpose, we'll start to see some adoption. And then I would say that the second really important thing for Botswana is to consider harmonization of regulatory frameworks from the start. Because the reality is that the angel investor ecosystem is already pan-African. I run an investor network of 220 senior investment professionals, women in African investments. And I don't know a single one of them that has a national strategy only. They're all pan-African. And they're all trying to invest in startups and SMEs within a portfolio. And if crowdfunding is going to be a serious mechanism for them to drop the costs of doing these deals, they need to be able to view multiple markets at the same time. If you're sitting in Kenya, you need to be able to invest in a Ghanaian SME and vice versa. So in that context, we don't really have a standout country, in my view, on the continent that is efficient and effective in harmonization. The East African community, so the 5 countries of Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda, Burundi, Kenya, have agreed to harmonize their regulatory framework for investments crowdfunding, and that's going to be funded by African Development Bank. But again, in theory it's nice, in practice it's something else. We don't really have the same infrastructures and platforms and passports as you see in the European Union, which, by the way, took a decade to harmonize their regulations for crowdfunding. So it would be amazing to see Botswana take the lead in the SADC region and, again, commit to the process to go all the way so we can have a genuine harmonized framework here. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think you touch on a very key point around an enabling regulatory environment, and you did note some examples in terms of what we could do as we develop our regulations to accommodate crowdfunding. And I think this is where I want to bring you in, Mr. Taule, and then I will bring you in, Mr. Mutsidisi, around, what kind of engagements is the regulatory community having with the financial sector around innovation? And on her point around harmonizing regulations, what are kind of the engagements that are happening between regulators around, policy development around innovation? So the engagements that the regulatory community is having with the financial sector around innovation, what kind of platforms are available for these ideas to come out and that to result in policy?
Oh, thank you. Sorry, there's an echo, so yeah, it keeps disturbing us from this end. I think what we normally do in terms of, especially in the financial sector, before we do any regulations, of course, we use a strategy where we say we adopt and adapt. So we don't just copy things as they are, like we said, and then bring them here. So we look at the international best practice and then sort of tailor-made them to suit our local environment. but most of the time, market participants or capital market participants play a very critical role in terms of shaping our regulation in a lot of innovatives. But the only good thing is that I think, in finance, innovation is always ahead of regulation. But the good thing is that I think there have been concerted effort in Botswana not to stifle innovation because of lack of regulation. We have always allowed the market to develop. I know when we introduced exchange traded funds, for example, we spoke to NBFIRA, and then we agreed on some principles, and then we are able to allow some level of innovation to actually proceed. And that is even actually happening now, even in terms of the green financing that is actually taking place. I mean, the market plays a very crucial role in shaping the market, especially when it comes to innovative products.
On the same subject of regulatory engagement, I think it's imperative. Any regulator who is too far ahead or most likely too far behind, I think is not going to be of too much use to the sector. So out of necessity and out of relevance at any one point in time, this engagement must be continual and they must be meaningful. I can give you one or two examples that demonstrate that. The point is that at any one time, the regulations must be not overbearing, but also not too lax to allow for activities which may turn out to be too harmful. Obviously, that's an ideal. How and whether you get it is the real task. And that I think every regulator aspires for, to try to make sure that you have that balance in order to enable the private sector to be able to take risks and innovate, which is their forte, but also ensuring that they do that in a way that is not ultimately or could be ultimately harmful to the broader society. So I think that is a given. Most regulators would agree. The degree to which they do that and the manner in which they do that might be the difference, how you approach it. I think in Botswana, we can say, I think the acting governor is sitting there, if I'm mistaken. There are many, many fora through which these engagements take place. Let me just cite two examples which I think will be relevant for this discussion this afternoon. If you take the area of payment system and money transfers, this is a relatively new area, a novel one, and innovative one that I think the regulators here, including the central bank, to a lesser extent NBFIRA, and the telecommunications regulators have cooperated with the stakeholders to ensure that they can facilitate. And the benefits of that, I think, have been obvious. If you look, for instance, in terms of the indicator of financial inclusion, we have moved from about the mid-50s% in 2004 to just over 80% in 2020. This is the people who so-called financially included. And this is by way of using the ability to be able to transfer payment, safely and securely to beneficiaries. The second one is a more recent work, and this is the formation of a working group, and this is a national level, and this is referred to as the FinTech Working Group. Some of the people in this room may have heard of that or members of that. This consists of regulatory authorities, ourselves, the Bank of Botswana, and other stakeholders on the private sector. The whole idea of that agency is to try to set up and carve a strategy that will provide for safe adoption of innovative technologies for purposes of the so-called fintech, as we know it, but even more relevant to this conference, green financing solutions. So that is merely to confirm that the necessity and importance of these engagements, on an ongoing basis to ensure that the adoption of the regulations, once they have been set, is much more, would be much more successful if there has been engagement throughout in conceptualization of those regulations. So a regulator will always be more inclined to have a more cooperative, for want of a better word, sector. Otherwise, you constantly run the risk of friction, whether it's overt or covert. Oh no, this is cause this is what is going to connect. And you can save yourself time and grief right up front to ensure that you do that as best as you can. So I cannot agree more with the notion of making sure that there is ongoing consultation with the industry.
Thank you. And I think you take us straight to the topic at hand, which is green financial services. You heard from Mr. Musidisi that there is ongoing engagements, particularly around green financing and how the regulatory landscape is going to create policies in that space. And I think I want to bring you in, Mr. Hodges, with your knowledge coming from EIB and the work you do around ESG. Just want to hear from you, what do you think the opportunities for green financing for Botswana are, and how can we leverage off these opportunities to become a leader in green or sustainable financing?
Thank you. Yeah, the EIB, we've got a long experience in green financing. We were the first multilateral to go completely, to be completely aligned to the Paris Agreement. So since January 2021, every project that the EIB does is aligned to the Paris Accords. So, if you even look at our website, you'll see that we are branded as the EU Climate Bank. So green financing is really in our DNA, and every project that we assess with a scoping on climate, on green financing. And green financing really is just a subset of sustainable financing. It just seeks to address climate change in that. And there's really two ways you do that. One is through mitigation, and one is through adaptation. And green financing, which most people will know about, of course the most obvious one is renewable energy. And that's, I understand, about where 80% of all green financing in Botswana, even though it's relatively small, is going into. But green financing, it goes well beyond that. It goes also through energy efficiency, biodiversity, circular economies, and a number of other areas. So it's quite a wide range, but the focus is always on the climate aspect in terms of making that work. When we're assessing a project, we will make sure that that project is assessed for the green financing, and if it's not, we will look to adapt it with the promoter to make sure that it does comply. We have also got a green financing toolkit, which is available on our website. Anyone can have a look at it. There's actually a number of tools available on the websites, and actually I would encourage everyone to look at there's a lot of work done by DFIs in terms of green financing and areas to go. It's incredibly innovative. There's a lot of new ideas coming up, and it was really nice to hear Elizabeth talk about new ways of financing, because I think Botswana has some challenges in terms of its size, in terms of population sizes and the opportunities in the marketplace that lend itself to make it difficult for it to achieve the economies of scale that Elizabeth spoke about, and lowering transaction costs. But I think there are opportunities here. I mean, a couple that I was thinking of, I'm clearly not a financial advisor, so don't go emptying your bank account. But I see common issues across the region when we're financing in the water sector, the agricultural sector, and the energy sector, of course. So I think that Botswana, in dealing with its problems, has the opportunity to leverage off that and springboard, as the president said this morning, into other markets. So a good example would be agriculture, so looking at genetics on cattle, etc., looking at vaccines. It could be in solving the Botswana problem, with the right direction. And again, it takes a lot of focus from government and fiscal incentives to do it. I don't think the private sector can do it alone. Is that you can then, in solving a problem for Botswana, you can then set up a base here to then service the rest of the region where they're facing similar problems. Water is a similar one. Botswana, of course, as everybody in the room already knows, has issues on water in terms of scarcity and direction and transmission. and water losses are high, but that is not uncommon within the region. In solving that problem and looking at monitoring tools, digitalization, technology, Botswana could set itself up well to service the region, which faces very similar problems. Renewable energy is one which I find interesting because everybody knows how good Botswana is for solar radiation, but one aspect is this idea of agrivoltaics, which is the idea of doing agriculture underneath solar panels. And these are areas where it's innovative, it's new, but it's somewhere where Botswana could lead on that. So, and if you could plug it into a neighborhood like South Africa, that's just desperate for power, of course, you could be solving two problems at once. So I think that these are the kind of areas I think where there's a good opportunity to do some green funding, but also go beyond that to look at not just solving Botswana's issues, but looking at actually then using that expertise to service the region. The last one, which is something I spoke about earlier, was on a financial hub. There's also a possibility of focusing. So that's what Luxembourg did. So Luxembourg focused on wealth management initially, and then now it focuses on innovation. So it's the place to go if you're doing things like aerospace engineering, etc. Luxembourg is the place to be, and very innovative work on medicine, etc. And they've done that only in the last 20, 30 years. So Botswana could be similar like that in terms of setting up some very innovative products and specializing. I don't think they'll ever compete, well, not in the short term, with something like Johannesburg in terms of retail banking, but they could specialize in a way that attracts that kind of investment to it. All of these things come with a caveat, which is what I said at the beginning about skills. It requires a very different skill set. It requires a very specialized expert skill set, and it's very difficult to achieve that internally for any country. I don't know of one that's been able to achieve it. Even in Europe, we need specialists to come in and help. So I think it requires a lot of direction. It requires a lot of focus, but I think Botswana is well placed to do it. And I think one of Botswana's advantages is size, ironically. It's small enough to make these decisions. A lot of the countries I work in my region are too big and too complicated to do these things. Botswana actually has the capacity to do it, much like Singapore did, much like Mauritius did, much like Luxembourg did. But Botswana is in that sweet spot to be making these decisions and being able to move the country forward. The flip side of that, of course, is that the capital base, although it's solid, is very shallow in terms of what it produces and what it does. So you'd have to grow that capital base, but you do have a very solid capital base in Botswana, with very good adequacy levels, very well-performing portfolios. So it's a good platform to leverage off. Thanks.
Thank you, and it's good to hear the benefits of having a small population and how we can use that to our advantage. And I think you spoke on renewable, which and the benefits of that servicing us locally, but also regionally. I think Botswana has the most sun hours in the world. Obviously, an opportunity there. I think I'll just open up for questions first before I open for the rest of the panelists to kind of unpack what are the key lessons and how do we move from here. So I think if there are any questions from the audience, we can take it at this point. And then I will then open up for the panelists to close on what they believe the next steps are. Okay, I see one question over there.
Good afternoon. My name is Bonola Gilevimang. My question is to Mr. TDC. You mentioned fintech, which leads me to ask, and Bufira, what regulations and policies have you implemented to ensure that financial institutions do actually follow and adhere to the standards set by the fintech group to ensure innovative and green financial services?
Hi, my name is Sapang, and my question, unfortunately, is to REM CDC as well. He had said earlier that there was some ongoing consultation with the industry, and my question was exactly which part of the industry, because some of what you said seemed more intellectual and seemed a bit out of par with happening on the ground in terms of funding of SMEs and the like. So I just wanted to find out, perhaps, maybe when he's talking about consultations, is it possible to talk to the people on the ground, the entrepreneurs, the SMEs who know what's going on, and then let's have that discussion so that there's more assistance and discussion on the topic.
Okay, thank you. I think Mr. Mutsidisi can take those two questions before we take the next round of questions.
There's a hand there.
Oh, you wanted?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. You know, the acoustics are not so good here. We can hardly hear what the questions, so I will do my best to approximate what I thought the questions were. The first question was the standard set, I believe set for fintech. The lights are also so bright here. We can't even see the people down in the hall. The general principle is that a regulator set the rules. Right from the acts of parliament, and their responsibilities to ensure and communicate and set the tone that the regulated entities follow and adhere to that. And there's a good reason for doing so. So the fintech specifically that I was referring to, it hasn't reached a stage where they have issued any guidelines. As I said, it's a relatively new formation. It includes the private sector. And the purpose of that is to say, out of those discussions, what is the appropriate strategy plan that the country should follow in order to harness some of these technologies in the financial services sector, I might say, because it is not exclusive to that, but simply in the financial services sector for the benefit of the growth of the financial services sector as well as the consumers of the services and products in that sector. If I didn't make myself, that is what I was driving to as an admission that there is importance in ensuring that when some of these regulations are conceived, there is prior consultation with the industry to ensure that their views are reflected into the ultimate design of the regulations. I think it's a related question from this side of the hall. What ongoing consultation? MBFIRA is set up by law to regulate non-bank financial institutions. So our primary mandate and most of our time is spent in engaging with those. And there are various ways in the language of supervision and regulation is off and offsite that we do. Now, through those processes, specifically to the sector that the industry that finances SMMEs, we have a sense of some of the challenges that they face on an ongoing. Let me give you an example. If you go to one of the financing companies and they say to you, look, we have a problem with financing. And you say the macro picture is that we have excess funding in the market. How can that be? And then we get to the granularities of why this happened. She's from the bank. When you come to her and say, I have a bank proposal project, she's looking at all these other things, and then on top of that, she'll be asking you for security, etc., etc. Imagine if a guy comes and says, I have an idea of forming, establishing, creating a search engine, I'll call it Google. I think it can work this way and that way. That does not very much lend itself to where the banks will look at a proposal. So what we need to do there in Botswana, and we've considered this, several reviews have pointed out this, that the area where the type of financing that is required is not altogether suitable for bank financing. There has to be providers. There has to be a way of supporting and enabling providers. In the United States, for example, there's a thriving industry of venture capital. And this is where some of these innovative ideas, which are not fully fledged businesses, have really got funding. And some of the household names that we know globally today really came through that day. So our architectural financing need to have all this all the way to long-term financing that caters for, I think there was a talk about infrastructure financing and so on and so on and so forth. So that's what we need to get to. So indirectly, I'm saying to the lady who asked the question, yes, we do get to get in. What we then need to do is to say, in the context of the regulations that we have, is there anything or are there things that are in the current regulations that are actually hampering the development, such as what I have alluded to? And that is where that dialogue can be very helpful in terms of changing and adapting the regulations to the circumstances. That's my best attempt that I can, but I'll be very happy to engage with you even after this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we can, round of applause. I think we can now take the next round of questions. I think there's one there and then you. Yeah.
Hello. My name is Edward, and I'm representing the youth. We are overlooked, and we need money and land. Because you guys be talking about stuff like financial stuff, and we the youth don't have anything thought. I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. We are broke. We are all broke, more especially the youth. We are broke, and we need a new system, because the people in the system are greedy. They are only there for their only self-interest, and we are not wanting to engage in such.
Thank you. There's another question there.
Hello. My name is Waidera Koketsomburu. I am an ACCA student at Botswana Accountancy College, currently pursuing audit and assurance. Okay, my question is, actually, the IFAC, which is the International Federation of Accountants, is an organization that promotes the development of accountancy profession, and it sets accounting and auditing standards. So I wanted to address all the panelists, and my question is, I would like to ask how the IFACs work on facilitating the mobility of accountants, how it can help to attract international accounting firms to set up operations in Botswana, and how the IFACs work on promoting high-quality accounting and audit standards, as well as its work on sustainability reporting, help to attract investment in Botswana. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we can take one last question. The man over there, I think he's had his hand up for a while. He's there.
Over there.
Yeah.
My name is Michael Mujaki, chairman of Citizen Contractors Association, which is a motherboard of over 200 small contractors. I'm going to try to emphasize what the lady has said, because I've been saying this in the morning, that most of small businesses don't have opportunity to get money. Though Mr. Mutsidisi tried to answer the question, we are still complaining that what is happening when the policy is getting made, because it doesn't cover us. We are demanded a lot of things when we get into the bank to be assisted, which this doesn't help our business to progress. So by the time the finance policy are made, make sure that you go straight into the ground where people are to get exactly what are we suffering about. Because finance is a serious problem when it gets to help us. We see it, like the gentleman said it, only people who are receiving help are those who are rich. I said this when we had a Havani previous Haburunsan that small people who are not assisted at all. Policy doesn't cover us. Even the banks doesn't recognize us. So please make sure that we are getting helped. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you. And I think if I tie your 2 points around accessibility to funding, and I think that's where, we have to shine the light on innovation, such as crowdfunding. So I think I'll give that question to you, Elizabeth, around, accessibility to funding and how crowdfunding can be a solution to some of the problems that are being raised.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question and for sharing that perspective. And I think it ties into the perspective of the other commentator. And this speaks to the need for an ecosystem, a supportive entrepreneurial ecosystem, so that if you do have a project, an entrepreneurial project, you can take it somewhere to develop it and to graduate it into the private capital markets and into this world. And incubators and accelerators and fund managers and consultants and accountants and lawyers and transaction advisors need to be in your orbit. And there needs to be a functioning ecosystem at the very early stage for your needs to be met. And then our regulations need to be responsive, as I mentioned, to those organizations and those individuals who are in your orbit. And look, if you want investments, crowdfunding, regulations in Botswana, he's your guy. Just write to Moshidisi and tell him about your need. Thanks.
Thanks. And I think the question around is our IFSC, how does it accommodate the accounting firms? I think I'd maybe want to broaden that to talk to also sustainability and give it to Mukhtar, Mr. Ba, around how IFCs should be set up to have a more diverse, to be able to attract more diverse sectors within the financial sector.
Thank you very much, Salma, and valid question there as well. Let me just maybe give the example in Belgium. I gave you a figure in my starting, let's say when I start my speech, saying 500 billion euro is currently being managed in Belgium. Let's say I'm a manager in a bank in Belgium, the oldest Belgian bank. We do wealth management. As we speak at this moment, I'm in the process of relocating a big portion of our asset under management toward Luxembourg. The reason, therefore, is simple, really. It's just one, the regulator, two, the ecosystem, the accountant, the IT, all the service providers, that ecosystem, that's a fundamental for the success of any international finance center. So, again, what an IFC could do for accountant or service provider in general, actually the question is all the way around. With the presence of those service providers, then by default an IFC will emerge. That's what I've seen and what I'm seeing. But I can give also another example that we did study is Singapore. Singapore is an example which is quite also striking because in a span of less than 20 years, they managed to overtake Switzerland as being the hub of global wealth management. So how they arrived to that, there is also a simple, because they invested in talent. They invested heavily in talent, starting with the policymakers, starting with the government employees. So they brought in a well-known global business school. They entered in a contract and agreement with them, and they managed to train first the policymakers, and then, let's say, the region, and then suddenly everyone flocked toward Singapore, and today Singapore is Singapore. So service providers, they can be kind of the reason why an IFC exists, and vice versa. The government could be also the key reason why an IFC exists. I don't know if that answers your questions.
Thank you. I think sorry, we can't take any more questions. I think just looking at time, but you can engage the panelists after the discussion on some of the questions that you might still have. And I think just as we get to a close, I'd like to bring in Mr. Tsaule around some of the incentives that we have put in place for green financing. I think when you look at your likes of your green bonds, those are transformational instruments, right? And having the right environment for us to be able to issue instruments is important in terms of how we transform ourselves as a country in that space. So just briefly to you in terms of what are the incentives in place, and then we can then go to the closing remarks. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Green finance in the stock market or the stock exchange. I think some of the things that we have actually done is that we have offered straight away discounts for issuing of green products. I think it's a good one, and also we have also went further to offer discounts in terms of successive issuances of green products. But also most importantly, there is as the BSE is the secretariat of all SADC stock exchanges, there's a green bond program which is sponsored by FOSD. FOSD is the British donor, where when you issue a green bond in our market, they can actually subsidize your costs in terms of structuring the bond. So that actually helps in terms of people who are willing to bring bonds into the market to actually get financing for expertise and also for payments of all other services that are actually needed, like verification, for example. I think those are some of the things that we offer in the market. Safe to say, yeah, we are also a member of the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchanges as the BSE. So we have got a very good sustainability, ESG and social bonds framework, and we should be seeing issuance in the market very soon. I think that's how I will conclude. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we can now open up for the closing remarks from the panelists. I'll start with you, Jim, around some of the discussions and what you think the next steps are for Botswana in terms of taking advantage of innovation and green financial services and becoming a hub.
Thanks very much. I think I'd just recap a lot of what I said before. I think, in my view, I think Botswana is very well placed. I think it needs a very concerted and a very bold movement from the government to move into that space. I think it requires a lot of input in terms of expertise coming in and training. It requires the environment, of course, a big investment in skills training and also the environment, which is something that the EIB, we do a lot of. So I think it's a challenge, and it's a very difficult and a very hard decision to make, but it's one that can work. And I think this idea of youth unemployment is rife throughout the region. And I think that growing an economy is the way you do it. I think you need the private sector to get on board, and you need the private sector to bring that development in place. I think any initiatives that are made to attract that investment are important. I think it's also worth bearing in mind that capital moves. There's other options for capital. It's maybe we want something, but the market doesn't. And so it's important to understand what the investor needs, and it is important to structure yourself to attract that talent. So best of luck.
Thank you. We can go to you, Mr. Ba, in terms of your closing remarks.
So, as I was saying, I will recap as well what I have already said. Today we are in Botswana, which is, again, the figure speaks by itself. Mining is the key driver of the wealth of this country. But the African continent, again, 1.2 billion and growing. I mean, talent, we cannot mine it. Talent needs to be nurtured. Talent absolutely need to be nurtured in this continent. The tools are out there. We are in the era of artificial intelligence, and I mean, it's feasible, it's doable, and we can fast track it as well thanks to the new technology. But therefore, you need to build the right framework in place, have those leadership, and put those leadership in place. That's number one. And number two, again, I'm based in Europe, so this morning we have this gentleman from the Netherlands. I mean, the Netherlands, today you have 1.5 trillion US dollar of pension funds in the Netherlands only. I have not said Belgium or other places, 1.5 trillion. If we manage to find the right mechanism to unlock at least 1 to 5%, or to convince them to allocate 1 to 5% of those money toward the African continent, I think we will get a bit further than where we are today. So whomever who's, and they're thinking, definitely building talent should be the number one focus, and knowing that means matching talent with global capital. So I stop there.
Thank you. Ms. Howard?
Thank you. I get the sense that our panel is not convincing the entrepreneurs in the room that we're relevant to you. So I'll just close off by giving you some examples of how relevant investments crowdfunding could be for you, and particularly to the green entrepreneurs. In Ghana, you can crowdfund from diaspora Africans and local Africans to fund the purchase of a dehydrator for mangoes in order for a farmer cooperative. You can crowdfund from diaspora and local individuals for the purchase of solar panels, the use of which will generate revenues, right, back to the crowd investors. With Untapped Global, you can crowdfund the purchase of water distributors in townships. Again, these are physical assets that generate predictable revenues, which is very nice for retail investors, right? We heard from Martin earlier that 1.5 million out of 7 million, I believe it was, for your solar panels in Botswana was actually crowdfunded from 1,000 Dutch people. That is huge. We just think about that. There are people, individuals, people like you and me in Europe that are willing to fund green energy, renewable energy projects in this country because of what Botswana has created from an investment environment perspective. We have to capitalize on this, and a shout out to the European Union, because they are actually the ones who funded the regulatory work in Ghana, and I really hope that we can do the same for this market. And stay hopeful. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Tsaule?
Yeah, I think from my perspective is that just to state that we have an active green bond program that is actually running. If you want to consider to issue green bonds, sustainable bonds, I think you can come and tap in our program, obviously, and you know, the good thing is that there's expertise that is provided for this, and you know, the funders have gone on board to pay for some of the services or costs that you might incur. And also, just as a stock exchange, I think we have moved faster in terms of accommodating sustainability issues and green financing issues to make the landscape much more favorable to potential issuers. And we have a strong investor base as the BSE, and therefore I think you can be able to raise capital and from the potential investors. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Mutsidisi.
Thank you very much, Salma. Let me, conclude where I started, that the idea of the FSC has not really done as best as we would have wished it to do. And I believe with the factors that I have highlighted earlier, we should relook at that and recalibrate, check where there are things or matters that were within our control that we did not handle as best as we can. To do that, many of you will be aware that His Excellency, the President delegation visited Bahamas, I believe, in the last week. And in the delegation was the Governor of the Bank of Botswana, precisely to go and discuss and see what is it the likes of the Bahamas, the likes of Bermudas, etc. have done, and make a success of the idea of an IFSC. And there will be further work in this direction to ensure that where we need to rebase and get back on track in order to be able to maximally benefit from the idea of IFSC that is done. Is an imperative, as I said, the economy needs to be diversified. This is one of the possible routes, this is one of the possible sectors which I think renders itself, make itself as a viable candidate for exploration. So thank you very much, moderator.
Thank you. And I think in closing, in the discussions that we've had today, it's very evident that we are moving in the right direction. We already have an IFSC set up. We are benchmarking, which is good. We are learning in terms of what we need to do to move better and to develop. I think there's a lot of opportunities for innovation and green financial services. And I think being a member of the financial sector, myself, it's imperative that we do our part in terms of developing this market. And I think if you look at, not advertising for ABSA, but if you look at the Sustainable Finance Issuance Framework, the first in the market was ABSA, and it is now, it's now on the stock exchange, ready, easily accessible by all actually, and therefore we are moving in the right direction. So at this point, I would like to thank our panelists for the knowledge that they have shared and the level of conversation that I think tackled this topic quite well. Please do give them a round of applause as they exit the stage. All right, thank you, panelists. So before you all leave, no, it's fine.